Hi, this is the first lesson for Birth Institute of CAM 0101. I'm going to break up the lessons into 15-minute slots, and I'm going to start now with the introduction to holistic midwifery. Just this quote, which is interesting, for me says a lot about the history of birth. The humanization of birth does not represent a romantic return to the past, nor a devaluation of technology. Rather, it offers an ecological and sustainable pathway to the future. That's Dr. Ricardo Herbert Jones, who you will come across in your readings when you're reading birth models that work further on down in the course. History of midwifery. It's long, it's complicated, it's rather nasty. But let's just start in the 1300s. Right back to the 1300s are the first writings about proper midwives. But traditionally, women held the wisdom of healing with herbs and traditional remedies, and they carried this as oral history, passing it down from generation to generation, often mothers to daughters or grandmothers to granddaughters, aunts to their nieces. And the older women taught the younger women how to care for their own families, but also for community members. And so each time there was a new generation of healers. Although not all healers were midwives, all midwives were in fact healers. There was, the persecution of midwives happened because there's always been something mysterious about the midwife. Midwives were always high in demand, as they were a comfort at birth and at dying. And along with attending births and dying, midwives were also counsellors, abortionists, also a rather important role, healer, pharmacist, nurse. But the big problem actually began because midwives also baptized babies at birth. In the eyes of the ever powerful church, this gave midwives a high status in community. And all midwives were women, and in the church it was dominated by men. And of course, women were not formally educated, but had inherited knowledge. And according to the church, all knowledge stemmed from the church, and so it was extremely suspicious of this inherited knowledge. This created a reaction which was really born out of fear, because the church kind of turned it around, thought, how can we stop all this power? And they started accusing midwives of baptizing babies in the name of Satan. And at the very same time, male, and it says male physicians, which is kind of not necessary because all physicians in those days were male, women were not allowed to study medicine, began to spread slander about midwives, and thus this terrible witch hunt began. Witches, as we know, were persecuted, burnt, at the stake, drowned, you name it. A terrible black moment in history of midwifery. Let's come to a little slightly more recent. Even though this historical persecution happened, midwives actually still attended half of all the births in most developed countries around the 1900s. And only 5% of births then actually happened in hospitals. Hospitals were nasty places. They were full of terrible hygiene, well, no hygiene at all. But then by 1939, about half the women that were birthing at home now had moved into hospitals, and mostly all of them were birthing, unfortunately, with something terrible called the twilight sleep. And I want you to go away and research this twilight sleep. It's quite horrific. I'll touch back on it in a minute. But in the 60s, 97% of all births happened in hospitals in countries like the US. So why this dramatic change? yeah, there were a few things that changed. There was a belief that physicians were the most qualified to attend births. How did that happen? That was a mad shift. Women began to desire pain control. There was that idea that we were the curse of Eve, that we were suffering because Eve had taken a bite of the forbidden apple. There was emancipation or a movement towards feminism. And so they wanted some more control. And unfortunately, the first way that women were receiving pain relief was a combination between an anemia medicine, so helping them to lose memory, and a pain relief. And that was the twilight sleep. It was horrific. The other thing that changed was that both women and physicians believed that hospital births were safer. So not only were physicians qualified, but the births at the hospitals were safer because there was an increase of technology, actually. And there was also a financial incentive to turn healthcare, and then especially obstetric care, into an industry more and a job, a very well-paid job. Obstetricians began to issue policy statements that shaped birth practices for women, even though these standards were frequently not, and are still not, evidence-based. We will talk about that in further lessons. And obstetricians have really done a good job of convincing the public that, in their policy statements, that their standard is the golden standard of maternity care. And also because of their financial strength, obstetricians are really a formidable force that we still deal with as midwives to this day. And so enter the medicalization of birth. This shift, let's have a look at it. Early proponents, because there is a shift, back to wanting midwifery and childbirth to be in the hands of midwives again, in the hands of women themselves. And this shift started actually really a very long time ago with Grantley Dick Reed and his Childbirth Without Fear in 1943, and then people like Carmel and Lamaze and LeBoy and Bradley, all in the 70s mostly. They developed programs to encourage women to reclaim their autonomy in the birth process, because too many women were being violated and controlled. This was also something that came out of that twilight sleep. There was so much damage to women because they weren't able to push because they were absolutely knocked out. Forceps and cutting and nasty stuff. Women also started realizing that there were dangers involved in having a baby in hospital. Not in the least the bacteria, but also something we called a cascade of interventions. When healthy mothers go in, it's actually more dangerous for a mother without risk to go into a hospital because she will come out having been intervened with in most cases, in most countries. And of course, we've seen worldwide a natural shift, starting all the way back in the 60s, but a shift towards natural, wanting things to be more natural, all in all, not just childbirth, but many other things. So let's look at the models of care that there are out there for midwifery. And the first one is the midwifery model of care. This is that pregnancy birth is a normal biological process which results in healthy outcomes for mothers and babies in most cases. The attention is to maximize health and wellness of the woman and her baby, with an obviously good focus on identifying and managing medical problems very early on, in any stage, attending to emotional, social and spiritual aspects of pregnancy and birth, protect and support and avoid interfering with the unique rhythm, character and timing of each woman's individual labour, because each labour is different. Midwives are trained to be vigilant in identifying women with serious complications, and medical expertise and intervention is only sought when it's necessary. Versus the medical model of care, which focuses on prevention, diagnosis and treating complications that can occur, and they do. And so then it's wonderful that medical model is there, thank goodness. It does emphasize the use of testing coupled with the use of medical or surgical interventions to avert poor outcomes. Medical expertise and inventions are absolutely vital when they are needed. However, routine interventions of women at low risk can actually lead to more problems, and this is proven. There's enough out there for us to know that this is a very real situation. And training in the medical model does not typically focus on developing skills to support the physiological, natural progression of an uncomplicated birth. So in conclusion, the midwife's model of care is woman-centered. It monitors the physical and psychological and social and emotional, actually, well-being of the mother throughout her childbearing cycle. It provides the mother with individualized education, counseling, prenatal care, continuous, it doesn't always have to be hands-on, but support and assistance during labor and birth. Delivery is the statement that is used. I don't use the word delivery, I use birth. And postpartum support. It minimizes technological interventions and it identifies complications to be able to refer women to the required obstetrical attention. And the other thing that the midwifery model of care does is gives mothers informed choice. And it's not here. I've taken this from the A.CAM model of care as it's stated, but that is also a very, very, very important part of the midwifery model of care. I'm going to stop here and continue with the next lesson in the following video. So I'll see you there.